Good afternoon. Welcome to the Museums and Cultural Arts Commission meeting. Looks like the first thing we ought to do is roll call.
Commissioner Castagna,
Here.
Commissioner O'Neill,
Here.
Commissioner Thomas, Commissioner Witowski,
Here.
Commissioner Peak, Commissioner Sovereign,
Here.
and Commissioner Evans.
Here. Okay, and so the first thing on the agenda is to receive a presentation from the Monterey City Attorney staff. And so is the attorney here? Oh,
Yes,
right in
I'm
front of-
on Zoom.
yes. Hi.
Hi. If it's okay, I'll share my screen and do a brief presentation. And then I can take questions from the commission. I'll just get to slideshow. Okay. Can everyone see the slideshow?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay. Well, thank you for having me. I'm Karen Salama. I'm the Assistant City Attorney. And I understand that some questions came up about the Brown Act, and our office is always here to help. So the City Attorney's Office, just so you know, we have 3 attorneys. Christine Davy is the City Attorney. I'm the Assistant City Attorney. Christian Wellish is the Deputy City Attorney, and then Alicia is our great assistant. So we're always here to answer questions from any of the boards or commissions. I thought it made sense to just briefly look at how the Museums and Cultural Arts Commission was established and its purview. That will then inform the Brown Act analysis. So as with all of the city's boards and commissions, it was created by the City Council, and that's embodied in the City Code. And Section 2-8.01 of the City Code sets out the powers and duties of the commission. And sort of significantly, generally, those consist of advising the City Council and making recommendations regarding the city's museums and its public art collection. So you know you're all very well aware of that. The additional powers specifically include, under subsection E, which I included a screenshot of there, the ability for the commission to create temporary advisory subcommittees composed solely of less than a quorum of the commissioners to serve for a limited or single purpose that is not perpetual and that will be dissolved once a specific task is completed. So significantly, the additional powers do not include the ability to form standing committees. So the basic rule of the Brown Act is all meetings of a legislative body of a local agency shall be open and public, and all persons shall be permitted to attend any meeting of the legislative body. So I know we're aware of that, but it's always good to remember it. And it's also helpful, I find, to remember the sort of purpose and the policy reasons underlying the Brown Act, and that's public access to decision-making, public oversight of decision-making. So we all know in the past there were secret meetings behind closed doors, and those aren't meant to happen under the Brown Act. There are a few exceptions that where closed sessions may be held, but the topics of those exceptions aren't under the purview of this commission. So the real question then becomes, what is a legislative body that's subject to the Brown Act? So all the City Council, all of the commissions and boards, including the Museum and Cultural Arts Commission, are legislative bodies subject to the Act. So are standing committees of those various commissions, as are newly elected and appointed members of those bodies even before they're sworn into office. So we just always like to remind people of that. Now, the standing committee is an interesting one because the Museums and Cultural Arts Commission is not authorized by the City Council to have standing committees. So for our purposes, the legislative body subject to the Brown Act is your whole commission. So under the Brown Act, there's also ad hoc committees. And the language in the city code regarding subsection E generally mirrors ad hoc committees under the Brown Act. So the Brown Act does not apply to advisory committees composed of less than a quorum if they do not have continuing subject matter jurisdiction or a fixed meeting schedule. These ad hoc committees are of a limited duration, and the Attorney General has specified that 6 months was an acceptable duration. So something that continues year after year, the same subject matter is being continued, that would not qualify as an ad hoc committee. So again, we talked about standing committees and that those are covered and subject to all the provisions of the open meeting requirements under the Brown Act, but the city code does not authorize those for your commission. And then I think it's important just to have a brief reminder, no informal meetings are allowed. And so a lot of times this comes up when we get to things like email. We cannot use other people or electronic means to have a deliberation or develop a consensus. And there's the daisy chain where one member talks to another member who talks to another member. And eventually a quorum has deliberated and consulted on an issue. That doesn't mean you've taken a formal vote. It can be as we all talked about that we wanted to have more public art. That can constitute a deliberation under the Brown Act if you're talking about a subject matter that is within your commission's purview. And then the hub and spoke is another example where maybe a staff person is communicating with all the different members of the board, and again, a deliberation occurs. And of course, in this day and age, we have to be careful of the reply all, where then on an email chain, it just inadvertently members end up deliberating on an issue within their purview. So there are exemptions, and individual contacts, one-on-one meetings are okay. That isn't, every contact isn't a subcommittee. You can have one-on-one discussions as long as then that one-on-one doesn't become one-on-one with everyone. You can attend conferences and seminars and other open and publicized meetings of another body of the city. So there are other ways to discuss. And then just as a cautionary tale, there are violations, possible penalties. If a member specifically intends to deprive the public of information by holding a secret meeting, not having it be open to the public, that could face criminal penalties. More likely is a civil penalty, which would be an action by the district attorney, or taking action to invalidate an action that was held at a meeting that was not properly conducted pursuant to the Brown Act. So always something to be cognizant of and aware of, and we all obviously want to make sure that meetings are conducted in accordance with the law. So we are here for all of your questions, and I'll stop sharing my screen at this time and open it up to any questions from the commissioners.
Mike,
Make sure you,
Sovereign?
Thank you. And I think we've been very careful not to use the email or other ways to get around this requirement, but the real rub, I think, for us is this duration. It's hard to get things done in the city in 6 months. And we, you know, what kind of extenuating circumstances might there be to have that extended to a year?
Well, I think the key in those situations is just to have the whole commission meet and consider the issue so that, you know, the public can all participate. It can be heard by the entire commission, and then there's no time limit consideration in terms of, oh, the committee can only last for X amount of time.
But the problem with that, I think, is that that would require the commission to meet more often than once a month, which is, I think, a real drag from a staff point of view. Because there are some things like art, changing things in the art gallery or having a concert, that it would be difficult to manage something like that from one month to the next. In other words, if you decide to do it in January and you come to the first to February, then to set maybe the theme of what you're going to do, and then it's March before you circulate the call to artists or musicians, and then it's April before you have something to decide that you want to, you know, you have submissions that you want to decide between, and then it's May before we come to a consensus on what it's going to be, and then it's June, and the time is gone from when we would normally have done something. Or you back that all up and you start in August or something. So it just seems to me that it's a subcommittee can meet more often and accelerate that whole process. But it sounds to me like if we have a music committee, you can't have it next year because that would be a continuing kind of operation. So it's a bit frustrating.
Yeah, I understand that frustration. Unfortunately, if you have a subject matter like, oh, a music program where, you know, it's occurring on an annual basis, I think it's really more likely than not going to be found to be a standing committee, you know, of a continuing duration longer than, you know, just, okay, we have this one-time event, we're gonna have a subcommittee for it. It's gonna look at this and then it's gonna dissolve. And these ongoing events are not really, they don't lend themselves to an ad hoc committee.
And we can't have standing committees.
Under the current city code, that's correct.
So can we ask the city council to amend the code?
Sure, definitely. Anyone can ask the city council either in writing or public comment for a code amendment.
But all the commissions have standing committees. Are you telling me that it's in the city code for the architectural commission, the historic commission, the planning commission, but it's not in the cultural arts commission? The city code doesn't deny us standing committees. You're just saying it's not in there. I mean, does the city code allow the council to have a standing committee?
So the way there's a legal doctrine where if there is a list of items and one would expect, okay, it mentions apples and oranges and specifically leaves out bananas, that then bananas are not allowed. That's a specific legal doctrine. And in this case, the Museums and Cultural Arts Commission, the city code specifically authorizes only one type of committee, and that is an ad hoc committee. And so my legal recommendation, therefore, an interpretation of that is that standing committees are not authorized.
But you didn't answer my question. What about all the other commissions and the city council? Does the city council have a standing committee? And is it in the city code that permits them that?
So I haven't looked at every board and commission. The or the city council, I am not aware of the city council having a standing committee on anything. I could look back and get back to you on that. The regular appointments to boards and commissions, it's not a standing committee because it's just the mayor. A committee of one is not a standing committee. So I can look into that further and get back to you, certainly.
And it's the same with ARC or HPC? They don't have,
To look at the different sections, but what I do know is that Museum and Cultural Arts Commission specifically only is authorized to hold an ad hoc committee. And I will say that I know Planning Commission for a fact does not have that similar limitation. And perhaps the council decided they felt that the Museums and Cultural Arts Commission should consider things as a body and made that policy decision. And they can choose to change that policy decision if they would like to.
okay, well, looks to me like, John?
I have a question. If we have an annual music program and it takes us, say, 6 months to get through what you described as the procedure for selecting the people who are going to perform. So we set up an ad hoc committee for the 2023 music program. And the ad hoc committee finishes its business in 6 months, it's dissolved. The following year, the city decides they want another music program for 2024. Can we then appoint another ad hoc committee to do that 6 months worth of work to get that program instituted?
So I think that approach carries with it legal risk, as really you're just changing the name and possibly the membership of the committee, and it's the same ongoing music program. So I would certainly caution against that and encourage compliance with the Brown Act.
Thank you.
Question, does the library commission have any standing committees?
I don't know. Again, I can report back on other agencies, but again, I looked up what this commission has.
And I can just say for as of right now that I'm aware of, no, we had an ad hoc committee regarding our survey, but that was a temporary survey that we were having regarding a very specific function for that. It wasn't an annual survey or anything like that. It was a very specific survey that we were asking.
What about standing committee? Do you have any standing committee?
We don't have any standing committees in there right now. And I'll say from the staff perspective, my perspective on the music series, the art series, is that we have to create a process where that's open and accessible for the public so that all commissioners can come in and the public can come in and voice their opinion and make their comments regarding the art and the submissions on there so that we are compliant with the Brown Act.
So you would not encourage us to approach the council about allowing us to have a standing art committee and a standing music committee?
I wouldn't recommend that based on the past, on how we've operated in the past where we've had, and I believe you've mentioned 12 to 15 submissions for music. I think those are that kind of thing where we can find a better way to have people submit the projects and have it in the packet, having somewhere where people can look at the content that's in the music packet, that all committees can see it. It's open and available to the public to see what kind of music is there. And if people want to call in or come to the meeting and make a comment on it, they can, so that they see all of the music that's been provided to the commission, and then all of the commission can weigh in on what they judge. But having it out there, and it would be in the packet and available for everyone to make comments on. And the same thing with a public art, so that people could all see what it is there.
Okay, John, Neil?
it would seem to me that there's got to be some staff work done to put the package together so that it can be presented. Thank you. Excuse me. There has to be some staff work done to get all the submissions so they can be put into one package that's agendized at the next commission meeting. Instead of just having these things float in and we pass them out at a meeting and no one gets enough time to actually analyze them. I don't think we want the subcommittee to make the decisions. I think we want the subcommittee to organize the process so that when the commission meets, they can make an intelligent decision in the open with the public. They have access to all the information. They can participate in the decision. But otherwise, we'll be running this thing forever.
I think then we came into this meeting hoping that we could have more ad hoc committees. And it sounds like from the city attorney's office, and I assume that you've checked this with Chrissy Davi. So ad hoc meetings are only for like a special event that occurs once every 2 or 3 years. You can meet for 6 months. Now we find out, I mean, our backup position was standing committees, and now we find out that we're not allowed to have any standing committees at all. So you're saying if you can't do it ad hoc and you're not allowed a standing, then the only way is a full commission. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So I would make a motion that we ask the city council to change the code to allow us to have standing meetings.
I would second that.
This is just a presentation item, so it's not appropriate to make a motion on a presentation item.
I'm sorry, say again?
Under the Brown Act, this is just a presentation item. It is not an action item.
That's correct.
I recommend that we put this on the next agenda for a motion to city council and have the city attorney's office and hopefully present at that meeting.
Okay, any other questions or comments on this issue or item? Okay, thank you, Karen. That was very helpful.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, and number 2 on our list is to receive a presentation from Corey Madden, who's been patiently sitting out here all this time.
I found that fascinating, you all. I don't envy you in having to try to cope with that. I'm so glad to meet all of you. I don't know if you all know me, but I'm just going to take my mask down for just a second so you do know what my face looks like.
Oh, you're
Corey Madden.
6 feet away from all of us.
Well, I'm so happy to meet you and grateful that you are interested in hearing some updates from the museum. I think we've got a presentation to help you just have some visuals. I think that you all know I came in August of 2020 during the pandemic and lived up at La Mirada and ran the museum on Zoom for a full year. And during that time, we did quite a bit of thinking about the museum's future. And in fact, one of the things that we did was bring in a group, we can go to the next slide, named Lord Cultural Services to help us develop a vision for the future. You can go on to the next one if you don't mind. Lord Cultural Resources is a Canadian-based company, but with big ties to California. They've done more than 1,700 museums around the world, and they really are the world's best museum planners. And one of the things that I recommended to the museum was to do comprehensive planning. There really hadn't been comprehensive planning about the future for the organization. And I think it had resulted in some decision-making that we needed to review. So what we did was look at the 3 pieces of property that the museum currently occupies or owns, which includes the historic site La Mirada, Pacific Street, which was obviously a lease with the city, but where we've been for more than 60 years, and Perry Lane, which was a 1.8 acre piece of land that was purchased just before I came on board, that's directly adjacent to the La Mirada campus. After a very long process that included, as you can see, a large number of stakeholders, we did an extensive background of all the documents that had been collected over 15 years about capital development at the museum. We did virtual site tours. We did 17 stakeholder interviews. We did visioning and programming and operational workshops. We did market and comparable research, and we did planning with the board and the community through a number of presentations. We came through that process with a pretty strong sense, after also engaging the city, that the really preferred site for the long-term future of the museum is at Pacific Street. And from the advice of the city at the time, we were led to believe that the city would really work cooperatively with us on trying to re-envision how we could make Pacific Street a more vibrant and accessible and welcoming location for the public, and enhance and deal with some of the really big issues that are there. What that will require, and again, this is just a presentation, but what we know we have to do with the city is renew the lease, which is good through 2034, but what we would need to extend. And then we would be in a public-private relationship with the city, raising the money to do a renovation of the building, and or working with the city on other properties and reimagine the building. So that we wouldn't necessarily, we've had Meg Clovis has come in and done a historic preservation phase 1 report on the building. And we do know that significant exterior qualities of the building are historic, but that the interior really does not have historic value. So the interior of the building can really be reimagined. We also know that the city, in our first conversations with Hans, was open to a dialogue with us about the park and how we might envision the park for the future. And then there are some other things that are going on that I won't talk about today that might have to do with other property in the historic district. So we're investigating those now. The La Mirada, we do think, is a highly valued community asset, and we really consider it a part of the museum's collection, would be one way to describe the building. But we do think that in order not to confuse the public, one of the reasons that La Mirada was closed was that it was very confusing to the public to have 2 locations. And so we've closed it. And what we really want to try to do is find a more sustainable way to run it as a different kind of operation. So we're really thinking of it as a center for California art, and it would be more likely to be a residency space, an education space, a venue that people could rent that has nonprofit, folks at sort of the core of our business model, but also could be rented out, but not a place for weddings, but more for indoor activities, smaller activities. And we are in a phase 2 now with Lord Cultural Services doing an estimate of cost and also, a site plan for us. So we will come through in the next month. We'll have both a phase 1 that looked at Pacific Street and gave us a site plan for Pacific Street. We will have done a historic preservation report, and we will also have a plan for La Mirada. Now, whether these can all be undertaken at the same time is another set of questions for the city, for the community, for the museum, because they are very large scale projects. But what we do know is that the Perry Lane location turns out not to be an ideal location for the museum. It's too big in terms of the amount of space we'd have to develop. It's actually in the 100-year floodplain, so it's problematic. And we heard from the city that Fremont Street is very much up for grabs, I guess would be one way to say it, that all the issues that you have related to the potential for sea level rise and the way that that might impact the estuary might change what's happening on Fremont Street long term. And we're thinking 100-year. This is a plan that's really about 100 years of thinking on behalf of the museum.
Corey, you may want to explain what is the Perry Lane.
So the Perry Lane site is behind the estuary car wash. It's where the Sumida nursery used to be. It is a beautiful site, and it's a site that can be built. It's very buildable. It's currently zoned C3. And we had thought that we might be able to build in that location some or all of the museum's operations. And in the end, we just felt that's not a practical thing for us. Mm-hmm. So we actually are in the process now and we will notify the city in writing that we are planning to sell the property, and we advocate that it should be a site for housing. And so we want to enter the housing conversation with the city. We won't control the piece of property, but we would really appreciate the city considering whether they would put an overlay on it before it's sold, because that could be very valuable to us and I think is the appropriate use. So those are things that we've talked about with Kim Cole. Just to talk about Pacific Street, I want to kind of help you all as the museums board think about both, you know, the vision for the museum, which is really that we can serve more people, that we can serve more young people, that we can connect more to other organizations, that we can make a more accessible site for and less expensive site, in some cases, make some programming that's free, but that we can also build a more sustainable museum, which is to say that we could build some other forms of income for the institution by adding a venue that we can rent at the Pacific Street location to the public. These are all things that would really transform how the museum is able to manage itself. Right now, the museum's receipts from visitors, it only covers about 10% of the expenses. And we get virtually no support from the city. We're responsible for all of our own maintenance. All those kinds of things are on the museum itself. So we are looking for how to do a better balance in relationship to how museums are managed. And that's what Lord is an expert at. And Lord gave us some very good advice about that. And we think there's a very doable way for us to not necessarily make all of our money from earned revenue, but we would do better at earned revenue. And we'd also attract significantly more people to this district, which should have the kind of multiplier effect for the district in terms of tax receipts. So currently we hit, when we're fully open and running and we have kids coming in regularly, we hit about 20,000 people a year. And we're projecting that we would hit maybe more like 50,000 people a year, which would make a big difference in the region. And we know that things like the Cooper Malera project have really transformed both the tax base for the city, but also the visitorship down in this historic district. And that's really what we're trying to work on. So things that are not working at this building, and I want to say that you should come visit me sometime and see some of these things because they're pretty significant. One of them is that the building is really not ADA compliant. So that's an issue that affects the city as much as it affects us because it is your building. It has very unstable conditions for art and insufficient space for moving art, and we're out of compliance with the American Museum Association, and we have our credential is in place, but we do need to be re-examined in the next few years. That's particularly because the heating and HVAC in the building really doesn't function. And so I inherited that when I came in. And because we have this beautiful climate, it's not really that big of an issue. We actually stay within the expectations of the AAM, but the fact of the matter is that we really need good HVAC. It's very important, especially as climate change comes on. We may see much higher fluctuations into heat ranges, and the heat is very dangerous for the art. We also noticed that we're hitting end of life cycle issues, and that's another really big concern. There are things that could collapse in that building, like the roof or floors or other things like that, that just simply would render us unable to run the building. So it's critical that we actually renovate this building. It's not surface renovation any longer. It's renovation that's really at the core of what the building is. And the museum is prepared to raise the money to do that. We're prepared to work with the both public and private sources of money and have done quite a lot of work over the last 2 years cultivating and want to, do that. And what we really need is for the city to be not just we need you to be an enthusiastic helper to us in getting something like this done, which will transform, I think, the area. So just to move on to the next image. So we want to work with the phrase consonant with its historic status. That's the terminology that Meg introduced us to, this idea of being consonant. So we would create a design that is consonant with the historic status of the district and the building's elements, but we would renovate both the exterior and the interior of the building to enhance and enliven the Monterey Island of Adobe's district. And that in addition, we hope that we could reimagine the sculpture garden and park for the public enjoyment. That's a park that belongs to the city, but we have sculpture in it, you have sculpture in it, and we think that that can be much more the way that people get into the building is to come in through the park entrance rather than up those stairs. And we really want to, one of the ways in which we know that we have, again, major ADA issues is that we actually make people go in through a separate entrance, and that's not legal. So it's not legal to ask people to come in through a separate entrance any longer based on ADA. So we want to have an entrance that's much more friendly. We'd like to have programming on the ground floor that's free and available to the families. We'd like to have more interactive experiences out in the park itself that are public art that has a form of interaction in it. We'd like to be able to think about something that we would, again, do very, very carefully, but we'd like to create a rooftop terrace. We think that we could create a floor above the museum as it currently exists while keeping the roof lines. You would still see the roof lines, but within a sort of cantilever and a section above where you could actually get up on top of the building and look out over the bay, and that you might be able to have a small gallery and a small catering space and outdoor area so that you could actually look at art and see it in context. You could see, oh, that's a painting that relates to this beautiful vision that you see from the bay. We also think it will be a real draw for people to come up and be on top of a terrace and see this beautiful district that we're in. And there really isn't another location like that. So we're hopeful for that. We'd have something that would be just like a grab and go cafe. It isn't a cafe that would compete with businesses, but it would just respond to the thing that we know about visitors, which is that they do get hungry, they do get thirsty. That we would have, I'm going to talk about today, that we would begin to be more of a producer of community festivals, and we could do that in partnership with the city. But that particularly we're going to start a spring festival that we're excited about and that we think will be a good example of what we can do on behalf of the city. We also really want to respond to the sustainability issues, and walkability is a big part of that. The fact of the matter is that being here in downtown, we actually contribute to walkability as opposed to being at La Mirada, where we really are forcing people to be in their cars to a large degree. And we think we also contribute to the walkability of this whole district as this district is going to grow and change, we think, over the next 50 years, let's imagine, that you want the Island of Adobe's district to be enlivened by lots of people coming in and out. And we think that we can contribute by being a partner to the city in relationship to public art that you might develop over the next few years. I think it would be great to think about how could the city and the museum together work on creating, more experiences of public art through the district in ways that would, be exciting for visitors. So they would actually walk through the district looking for that art and then spend time at the museum. So, well, I just wanted to, again, kind of go over just some big pieces of what you should know about what we're going to do. We think that we can stabilize the attendance of the museum at about 50,000 people. And this has, again, been heavily researched by looking at 5 or 6 other communities that are the same size, by looking at museums and the square footage that museums have to have in order to attract people, by looking at the visitor projections and the potential of a cultural visitor, which is something that we really think that there's a strong opportunity to develop stronger cultural visitation, and that we could work on that with the Convention Bureau. So that would really make a very significant difference in relationship to the city. We expect that we would not grow too significantly, only about $1 million more in operating costs. So that's also one of the advantages of staying at Pacific Street, is that we stay more compact in terms of how many staff we need to run the organization, and that keeps our operating expenses relatively low. Most new buildings cause a huge ballooning of operating costs, and we're really trying to keep our operating costs modest. And then we look at the future as being something where we would develop more endowment, so we would be more protected and able to, with consistent money, protect ourselves, but also have earned revenue as well. And that would come to some degree from rentals, and it would also come from the marginal additional value that we would get out of things like a cafe and or gift shop. So we think that, we've got a very sensible plan. It's been developed very carefully, and we can share more detail about it at some point. Then one of the things that we're launching this year and that we're super excited about, and Bill encouraged me to talk about it, is something called the Block Party, which is going to happen this year on April 15th. And there'll be a luncheon for the sponsors at Cooper Malera on the 16th. And this is a lovely quote that Tyler gave us, the mayor gave us in advance of the MC Gives campaign, to just be a sponsor, be actively an endorser of the work that we're doing. But the block party, the idea of the block party is that we will have public art outside the building that's temporary. And then we'll also have a lot of participatory art experiences for people to take part in. And we're closing Calle Principal for just 4 hours from 11 to, I think it's 11 to 3. I'm not sure exactly what the hours are. And then we'll transform the building, and then we'll have a nighttime kind of dance party and a free opportunity to come in and visit the museum. That's for a kind of youth audience, kind of young adult audience. And then the next day we'll do this lovely sponsor luncheon. And we think that this is the beginning of our being able to enliven the island of the Adobes district. We'd love to build this as a project that the city and other partners in the district are excited about. The library is an obvious potential partner for the future. You could see this being something that closes the district for a little period of time to celebrate really what the district and what we're all about, which is that arts and culture are really an important part of the story of this community. So this is our attempt to kind of start that, be the spark for that. Along with it, we have a artist in residence that we'll pick each year. And although this year we're working with a woman named Amy Berkman, next year we actually have already picked our artist in residence, whose name is Jane Kim, and she'll have an exhibition opening at the museum in January. And Bill and I have talked a little bit about this. She's an incredibly important California public artist who focuses on natural populations. So she's interested in migration, and she's done amazing murals up and down 99 of bighorn sheep. She's doing steelhead salmon. She's done whales. She's done just beautiful things. And she would love to do something in Monterey with us. And we would really like to work with the city to try to find a location, and the Old Monterey Foundation, if possible, to find a location where Jane could install a mural on behalf of the collective group of people who get behind it. And I think it will do some of the things that we're talking about of making the experience of coming into the island of the Adobes a mix of this incredible historicity with also some new things on more commercial buildings where it's more appropriate. So that's something to look forward to in terms of what we're hoping to do. So I'm happy to answer any questions. I don't know if I have any other. Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, Mike? Yeah.
I'd like to welcome Corey to our meeting and say I've really been impressed with what she's done at the museum. Lots of innovative thinking, and this idea makes a great deal of sense to me. And I'd like to think that we can participate to the fullest. It's got a lot of, we've had a long interest in public art, and we'd really like, I'll say, not we, your approach. And, there are practical problems, as you probably learned in your 20-minute wait for the beginning of working with the city. And as I understand, the city actually owns the entire property on Pacific Street. Is that
That's great. The
correct?
Pacific Street location belongs to the city.
You're in bed with the city anyway, so all we can do is hope to find a good plan to use all the capabilities that are in the area, and there is just a great deal of capability. Monterey, in my opinion, should be the West Coast version of Williamsburg, and that's a big step, but we could get there.
Yeah, absolutely. One thing I want to just mention about my own experience is that I spent 22 years at the Music Center of Los Angeles. And the Music Center of Los Angeles is a county-owned facility that has operating partners. And those operating partners raise private money to build buildings or renovate buildings there. And that's been a standard way that the Music Center has operated. And I think it's been a very successful way that the Music Center has operated. And so, my hope is that we want to look at, and, again, this is just a presentation, but I'm very hopeful that one of the ways that we can work with the city is for us to do some research together about those kind of novel partnerships, because I think private-public partnerships are the way that you can get a big thing done. You're never going to be able to raise the money to renovate that building yourself. It's not a priority for the city, but it is a priority for the arts community for that to take place. And there are a lot of people who want to get behind that. So figuring out a way for that to happen, when you know that otherwise, if you don't do something, that building is literally going to become a danger to 10,000 works of art. And that's what we have to really recognize, is that the huge cultural legacy is not just the building, which you could argue is just a 1920s building that was a mortuary and then was a city building. I mean, it's an important building, but it's not nearly as important, in my opinion, as the 10,000 works that over 60 years, the people of Monterey have collected. And since this isn't a city it is a private organization working on behalf of the county of Monterey, I think that it really makes sense for us to really be bold about that and recognize that is the way that many, many, many municipalities, I would say that it's true also in New York City, that the vast majority of arts organizations in New York City are a mix of city land and or city buildings and operating companies and foundations. So we just need to find the structure to do that. And my sense is that we can.
Bill?
I have a question.
Yeah.
Does the Stanton Center have any relationship to the properties that you're talking about?
I don't know what the
Yes,
Stanton Center is
It's
actually.
currently run by the Monterey History and Art Association.
No, I don't think so. I think that we have I believe what I understand from talking to Kim and Hans is that the history is so old. I mean, basically it went from being a city building to becoming the museum 60 years ago. So they're really, I think that precedes the Stanton group.
Right, and although the city owns the land, the MHAA actually own the building, which would revert to the city at some point in the future, but
You mean in the buildings that are owned by MAH, right?
yeah,
This building, I don't think has any connection to that.
right. And so the question would be, is there any relationship between MHAA and MMA?
Well,
Or is there
I
any potential
think
for-
we want to be good partners, and I think we just have to try to decide what we can actually be great at. And one of the things that we're trying to be great at is these two amazing locations that we currently have to take responsibility for. And that is probably as much as we can really do. But as far as shared programming or shared, thinking about where historic collections get directed, I've said to Bill that I think it's important that as you think about that location that's down at Custom Square, that it's really important not to build a museum that directly competes with the Museum of Art, because you really have to be careful that you don't create the same problem we had with La Mirada, which is that people are confused and people are split in their interests. And I think that that's something for the commission to take, fairly seriously, is that what a good cultural fabric looks like is one with multiple, groups that are attracted to a multiple sets of well-defined things to do, and that they can extend their visit as a result. They get excited because they can go to the aquarium and the museum and, something else. Not that they think, oh, well, there's 6 aquariums and I'm going to just pick one.
Yeah, that is the building in the plaza down there. That is the Stanton Center.
Yes, I understand. Yeah. And I think it was a maritime museum, and that
that's-
seems like that would have been again, I know it didn't necessarily succeed, but in terms of what do they call it in marketing, it's called differentiation. It'd be really important for there to be strong differentiation between the cultural organizations in town.
Bill, you were going to say something?
Yeah, I just want to echo Mike's comments, and I'm just so glad that the board and you made the decision to keep the museum downtown. I remember one time we had the miniatures at La Mirada, and it was like 20 or 30% of the capacity at
Right.
the Pacific, just because it's walkability and the location. So the loss of the art museum on Pacific Street would be a tremendous loss for the downtown.
Right, and we don't really think that La Mirada is a 21st century building either. I mean, in a
Right.
way, the issue is right now that the museum doesn't have 21st century capacity in either building. And that in order to really use our resources best and to achieve goals for our community, which is what we really care about, then investing in that location downtown definitely has, I mean, just even from things like, again, just climate change that might take place, that's a much better location from the point of view of climate change as well. So,
And one additional comment, I'm a member of the Old Monterey Foundation, and some of us are very excited about the block party. And next Wednesday, we're going to discuss maybe, we were thinking of having a plein air event
great.
where you have artists painting outside, and maybe we can work with the Museum of Art and have artists on Pacific Street or Colton Hall Lawn or Cupa Malera, and to just have the whole downtown,
Yeah.
the core area with artists.
Yeah, and I think as you can imagine, just something like that as a first gesture, and you can imagine it growing a little bit. I think you could end up with something that's happening in the district that's, curated well by, the museum and other partners, and that's really unique, not just a street fair, not your average street fair. But I grew up at the Smithsonian with my mom, who was the head of education at the Museum of Natural History, and they started the American Folklife Festival. And the American Folklife Festival was a great example of a absolutely, galvanizing mall-wide event that went on for 20 years. And it was great because it was all about learning about and playing and hearing really amazing music. And I think we can do something similar with learning about playing, engaging with making art and being a part of art and art connecting communities. And I think that that's something that we can really see be very powerful for that district. And at the same time, get excited about the beautiful buildings that are there, which I love, and which we think there's some great things that we can do that are temporary with them, with light, for instance, that could make an incredible experience at nighttime for people to come through the district at night. I think it could be incredible. And there are lots of examples of those kinds of festivals in places like Europe that have transformed sleepier little places into these, incredible tourist attractions because they do what's called a Nuit Blanche, a light at night festival. And I'd love to do something like that in the future. So thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it. I know I've taken a lot of it, but I wanted to see you all and would love to come back. And when we do have something that we would like to have as a motion, I think I'd benefit from having the chair advise me a little bit about what kinds of motions would be helpful. We know we have to go through a lot of different committees, and we're sort of teeing up now for this next phase, which is to begin thinking about design, to begin thinking about needing to have an agreement between us and the city. Things like that are what are up on the horizon, and beginning to talk more publicly about raising money and looking for, and I think there is public money that we can go for. And we'd love to see the council help us in advocating for some of the infrastructure money that we know could be beneficial. So the park itself is a good example. The sidewalks would be another example. So, thank you. Appreciate your time.
One last question.
Yeah.
What are the plans for YAC,
Excuse me?
the Youth Arts Council? YAC,
Oh, YAC. Well, so we don't run YAC, but we work with YAC very closely.
you house them, right?
Yeah, we don't house them. They are down the street from
Oh.
us. But we have a very close relationship with them. We also are building a really close relationship with the high school. And we have two big new programs that we're bringing online this year with the high school. So we really see ourselves again as in a kind of partnership with these, close neighbors. I'd love to build a book club with the library. We're sort of experimenting with something like that. We just really want to be more a part of a number of different communities. And we think the best way to do that is through partnerships. So we'd love to develop partner programming. But YAC is doing great. They've got new leadership and they're an amazing program.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay,
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, and now it's time for public comments. Francesca? Do we have any public comments?
We have the minutes first, Bob.
We do? Oh, all right. Let's do the minutes first. consent items. So we have the November 3rd, 2022 minutes. Seems to me I got more than just the November, but maybe we're just behind on signatures. Anybody have any questions about the minutes? Or amendments?
I don't, but I'll make a motion to approve the minutes.
Is there-
Second,
John? And, okay, and so all in favor of approval of the minutes?
Aye.
aye.
Looks like it's unanimous. So that's the end of the consent item. So now we're ready for public comments.
For anyone who'd like to make a public comment, you may join by telephone by dialing toll-free 833-568-8864. Enter meeting ID 161-622-2299. If prompted to enter a participant ID, press pound. If you are joining us on Zoom, please raise your hand using the toolbar. There are no public comments, Chair Evans.
Okay. Seeing no comments, we'll move on to informational reports and staff comments. So we have an update from Brian coming up.
Thank you, Chair Evans. Yeah, so first off, starting off, you'll see in the packet at San Carlos Beach, there was a request from Commissioner Thomas before regarding at a prior meeting, we talked about the sardines in a can, and we inquired with our Parks and Recreation about removing the sand and how much that would cost, because this is an old drying container on San Carlos Beach. And it was from the cannery that was out there. And so we did a little bit more research, and in the museum's office, we found the documentation from that it was actually called Cannery Row Catch, and it was decommissioned back in 2001. So at that time, the artists were notified that the piece was going to be decommissioned. There used to be like a stainless steel plate inside of it, and then there was the rocks that were kind of reflect the different fish that were caught in there. And what happened is basically, as you will see with these tides, that, that they get filled with sand, they get filled with water, and it deteriorated over time. When they're initially working with the artists back during the installation, I heard that the drainage was something that was brought up at that time, but it was discussed not to kind of modify it. So this just wanted to notify the commission that that piece has been decommissioned from our art collection. So there's no further action needed on that item. However, there's more thoughts on anything with San Carlos Beach, so we can pursue that at a later time. And there are photos included on there in terms of what the condition was back in 2001 when they came in there and cleaned it out, and the stainless steel plate, which I imagine was probably recycled at that time because it was removed. There's no note about what happened to that. But it's pretty much all deteriorated on there.
When you say it was decommissioned, does that mean that the city no longer owns it?
I believe we own the property, but the artwork, it was just not part of our museum's collection. So it's not something we monitor and maintain in any capacity right now. So they took down all the signs on that spot, but I imagine that the container is still owned by the city. I haven't looked at the property records.
Yeah, it's on the beach. So I think that's all part of city property there at San Carlos Beach Park.
Yeah, I didn't know based on kind of, the Tidelands standards in the, where it's located right there, whether that's state or public or how that is listed. So I don't know exactly, John, but I would say that if that was something we worked on, I would assume, but I can always get back to you with that of who owns that piece and that structure. But as far as I know, that just meant that we were no longer going to maintain it, and we just removed it from the collection. And 20 years ago, we said we're not going to continue to clean out this container that fills up with sand. After that, there is the mural and there's more work. You'll see the photos on the attachment. The, excuse me, our artists, based on the wind and the rain, they have not been, coming back to work on this until we get another dry spell.
Dries out.
Yeah, so, but it has overhung, under the overhang, it has held up, so it looks really nice out there. And this is the Young Readers mural over in the library terrace. And this is, you'll see the photo of our muralist Natalia, and on the left, and their assistant Raven. They've been working on that, and they're close. They only have a couple more days left of painting. So we should be opening up that. So right now that we have the terrace locked to the public right now, and we're currently keeping it like a barriers. We just have A-frame barriers around it, so nobody messes with the painting as they're working on that. So
And the painting is gonna get a clear coat on top of it to protect it from the weather.
we're gonna get a UV glaze is what they're gonna put on first, and I'm inquiring with the city regarding a graffiti coat, because what we want to make sure is that any coating that we put on there, that it's not gonna damage the UV coat, not damage the paint that's underneath. And it's something that if there are specific like graffiti coats that you want to make sure that thing attaches correctly to the paint and the UV, so that if somebody comes in, you can clear, you can clean it off relatively easily with not damaging underneath. So that's, I'm waiting for the city public works to get back to me on what kind of appropriate graffiti coating we can put on there.
Sounds good.
And moving on, we have the NCIP project status. So that project is going to be opening up fairly soon. The NCIP process is on the city website. The calendar has not shown up there. I believe it's going to be early next month in February or mid next month. The NCIP process is going to open up. And so you'll see the council approve the projects 1 through 30. And they had a balance of a contingency of projects 31 through 35. So really there's 34 and 34, they're tied on there. And number 34, the only item that's part of our museum's collection is the Great Blue Heron sculpture. That's at El Estero. And I believe that was as the water rises and falls over there. And I think, Jordan, you've been by there recently too, right? I've driven by El Estero a couple times during the storm, and the statue looks okay right now. But these are the rankings I've listed here, for not in terms of the ranking from priorities here, but this is in terms of like where they landed on the NCIP project list. So you'll see here, as I mentioned, 1 through 30 were approved, but do we have after that a number 45 public art security plan, number 54 Cannery Row worker shacks, number 64 police and fire honor garden, number 71 shoreline fish hopper restoration and historical signage, 73 Bruce Harris Way lighting upgrade, 89 slope monument repair and restoration, 92 historic Monterey master plan for art, 97 lower Presidio walkway phase 2, number 102 path of history map mural, and 122 Monterey walk of history milestones. So this is where the number of items are pretty low on the priority list, but if you have anything coming up, we should be looking at that.
Now, this priority list was generated last year.
Because it was voted on I believe in September. So it was voted on in September. So it was generated last year. Generated early in 2022, and then voted in September is when it went to council. And that's when they appropriated and said, we have, looking at the transit occupancy tax rate, that's where they looked at the TOT, and they said, we have funding available for projects up to this amount, and then allocated 1 through 30 as their ranking.
Right now, but they're gonna get new project proposals.
Starting next month, I believe, is when it's going to open up again.
Right, and so then these are sort of already in the mix with the new ones. The rankings might change in the next year, in the next go around.
They'd have to be voted on. My understanding is that people would have to vote on these items, rank them for priority during the NCIP meetings.
alongside of new projects that are going to be proposed.
Right, unless these are taken out, yeah.
There are quite a few projects here the commission might want to review and select what, what we think are the top 3 or 5, whatever, and give at least our input to the NIP committee.
I quite
That
agree.
doesn't mean that they're going to be approved, but at least we could say, these are the ones that we feel are the most important.
Yes, I think that's an important thing to do.
Yeah.
Can we do that today, or do we need to think about that and do it the first meeting in February? In other words, make it an action item in February.
Maybe we need a subcommittee.
So
No, we'd have to have one every year.
my take on it is, what I would like to see is that we bring it possibly any new items or limit what we want to bring forward, because I think there are some other, there's 2 other items that I really think would be needed here. I think, I don't know if that would be
And I
Yeah,
think that would be
next
a good idea, Brian, that you and Jordan look at any new items plus these items and give us your recommendation for the top ones in priority.
right. And that's how I feel is that, thank you, Commissioner, because I think that we can come back and look at what do we think are going to be our priorities? Because what I notice on this list is that based on the list that was provided in CIP to me last year, some of the items which were listed as low priority for the commission were actually ranked higher than our higher priority items. So really making clear that like we have some setting aside just like very specific, like we want these 3 or 4, like which ones do we really want to highlight for this coming year?
Right. So that should be an item for next
I believe,
meeting.
I believe so, yeah.
Okay, great, thank you.
Okay,
Ask Brian, one other item that happened this month is that Brian, Bob, and I met with Gary Spradlin and Susan Marr of the Monterey History and Art about Stanton Center. Not to discuss the details of that, but I wondered if it would be appropriate if Brian could ask Gary and whomever else from MHAA to come next month and give a similar presentation, just like Corey did. What is their best guess on what's happening with the Stanton Center? If he's not ready by February, then by March, but even their initial thinkings would be helpful for them to present it to the
Right.
commission.
And I'll reach out to Gary over there at MHAA again and ask them, give him the time frame for our February meeting to
Great.
come out and present.
okay.
Thank you.
Great.
Absolutely.
Okay, any other comments or questions on Brian's report? So,
I have a question about
Sure.
About the mural, at the library, will there be like a dedication kind of ceremony or something?
One of the things
Mike?
I was gonna mention at the end.
Oh, Mike, your mic.
Commissioner Comments.
Okay,
Yes,
we'll wait. I can wait.
our current plan is for February 18th for a gathering at the mural to
Dedicate.
dedicate that. And so if that's a Saturday, I think it would be in the afternoon, fairly early in the afternoon, probably. So if you could note on your calendar that will be a plan, and we'll get out a formal invitation sometime this month.
And Commissioner Sovereign, if you can connect with me, because I'd love to put out a press release, anything on that, so we can highlight and get some interviews with everybody ahead of time, bring people out. Thank you.
okay, so we're now up to number 5. Receive the Cultural Arts Museum and the Cultural Arts Division Activity Report. And I think that is Jordan.
The highlight of the evening. Hello, everyone. Happy New Year. So since we had a 2-month period here, I'll try not to bore you too much. But I will start with so Director Edwards and I, you may recall a couple of months ago, we were awarded a grant through the Foundation for Advancement and Conservation. So we interviewed, I was part of 2 of 3 interviews for some assessors to come out and assess Colton Hall and the jail and the vault. And I believe 2 have been chosen, or
I'm looking at getting 2 of them into contract right now. So we're looking at, and this would be one is a collection assessment, one is a facility assessment. So this would be the cost is covered by the collection assessment for preservation through FAIC. And they come out and they do an assessment of your building and like, the grout, how the standards, and then somebody else looks at your collections and how they're stored and all those operations.
And so we're really looking forward to having this done. And so hopefully that'll be in the next couple of months. We'll see how all the contracting goes. The big item on here is Christmas in the Adobes. It was slower this year, but it was still a successful year. The rain stopped on the second day before things really, or the event started. So we actually had people come out. We only had 1,052 people come out, but I would say with the weather conditions, it was pretty impressive. And I would like to thank everyone who helped out, Francesca, Andres Garza from the library. Our museum attendants were fantastic, standing up around, walking around, talking to people for 4 or 5 hours. And of course, to the commissioners, Wachowski, Thomas, Sovereign, and Evans for helping out. It's my favorite event of the year. And so it's a privilege to be able to work the event and look forward to next year on that. A more, I guess, fun note, Director Edwards and I were involved with the Western Flyer Foundation back in November. The board came and visited the lab and had a tour. And then that evening there was a dinner, or not a dinner, but a get together with community members involved with the Western Flyer coming and had a presentation. And so they don't have a set date yet for when the Flyer will be coming here. They're working on a couple of locations where they can dock the Flyer. And right now they're just waiting. Last we heard was shipping issues on parts they need to finish the boat. And so hopefully this spring it may be coming down. As we're updated, we'll continue to keep you updated on that. And then, so in November, we did the new format for the second Saturday tours at the Pacific Biological Laboratories, and it was a success. The first 2 hours were structured tours like we did in the past. And then from 12 to 4 was just open hours. And within that first hour, we got, I think, 41 visitors, which sometimes is what we get in a whole day for the tours, depending on the time of year. And it was great because we didn't have to turn anyone away. People could come in, look around, ask questions. And so we're looking forward to, not this weekend, but next weekend, the 14th, to doing this again and to continue with this new way of doing the tours, and hope that we continue to have that same success. Let's see.
Can I ask a question about that?
Sure.
You didn't have all 41 inside at one time.
No, they just came and went as they were able to. Because what happens usually more in the afternoon is people are on their way rushing to lunch, or they're at the aquarium, they're going to lunch, or they're going whale watching. So people come in, they're like, oh, I got 5 minutes before I have to be here. And so they can go around really quick instead of being forced to, sit down for 40 minutes and then kind of walk around and then leave.
So you haven't found a need to sort of monitor the number of people in and then the number of people out?
So what we do is we have a docent or myself just at the front door and counting people as they come in. And if we get to like a capacity level, then we can stop them. Just like, oh, okay, if you could just wait a few minutes for, some people to come out. We didn't get to that, fortunately. And so everything just, yeah, some people who really love the history of Steinbeck come in there and they on their own, they'll be there for an hour looking around, asking questions. Some people have kids, so they come in and then realize, oh, this isn't the greatest for kids, and then they leave. And so, yeah, it's just so many different people. And I know we planned on working on some new signage out front for the tour days to also kind of get people's attention, because people are still confused of what we do. They think we're an actual biological laboratory, or that we do COVID testing. And so, yeah, we're working on that aspect to put something non-invasive on, just that we can put up during tour days so people know what is happening. Let's see. And then I was recently interviewed by KSBW about the Buffalo Soldiers exhibit, which is still not ready. We're working out some kinks on that, some alterations on the uniform and with the mannequin. And so I'm still working on it. It's not long. It's not forgotten. But the piece has not been released yet. They'll let me know when they're going to air it. And that should be shortly. We'll see how all this storm stuff has kind of taken the spotlight of everything. So hopefully that'll be soon. And then I was also on a podcast talking about our moon tree. And I was on the podcast for 30 minutes for the interview and made like 2 minutes in the actual podcast. But they had actual NASA person on the podcast, and so who's a little more important than me. So that's okay. But it's a interesting story of the moon trees in general, and how when this gentleman started at NASA, he didn't even know about them until someone asked him. And then now we have all the information that we do on the moon trees because of this person. And I would also like to thank the Monterey Public Rotary for once again decorating Colton Hall. I think this is like their 15th or 17th year of decorating Colton Hall, the outside and the inside. And so we're very appreciative of what they do, because they're able to get that all done in like a 2-hour period, which would take me a long time to do by myself. So really appreciate that. And then let's see, the last one is Director Edwards and I met with Monterey Herald reporter Tess Kenny. She wrote an article on the Monterey Angels and met us at the East Parking Garage, where all the angels that are not being hung are stored, and took photos of every single angel. Asked questions of the history, what our plans to do with the angels in the future. And so if you haven't seen, I think that came out on Christmas Day. Yeah. So if you go to the Herald, you could find it from Christmas Day posting. She did a wonderful job, and I think that is the highlights of my report.
And can I add one more thing real quick, just from Jordan's report, because it's also connected to our Monterey Museum of Art. There's a note in here regarding Elkins Park. And Elkins Park is the park that is next door to the Monterey Museum of Art. And that is a city park. And the sculptures there are either owned jointly by the city and the museum, or the museum, and that is initially designed as a rotating art sculpture garden. So that is part of, like, when Corey is discussing the sculptures that are on there. So see the note that Francesca Garibaldi and I have been working on getting the signs replaced, because the signs they're small, like art signs that have deteriorated. So those are being updated, because we feel that having those right now, that's the short-term plan of having those up to date and making sure those are quality inside of our parks, because it's a shared operation. But that is the one spot where right now where we have like a shared operation there with the MMA here with this commission.
Okay, Bill?
One quick comment. I'd like to compliment Brian. I talked to him, and that here are these great Christmas angels, but none of them are in Alvarado. And Brian said he's been working on that because of the new streetlights or whatever in a form of attachment. So he said that he'd like to work on it so that next year we can have some angels on Alvarado. So thank you for doing that.
I can mention that as on here because we have the angels on here too, is that one of my thoughts is that I think if you look at the angels and if you're in the garage, you'll see a number of them have been cracked. If you're on Del Monte Avenue right now, you'll see a piece of an angel that's still mounted up there because the angel fell during the last storm and during the last windstorm. And so these are things that, like, once they fall, there's significant damage to this wood, it's plywood. And I look at them as there's an art component of them and there's a decoration component for them. Or we have both, right? Where the angels have a decorative component for the holidays as well as an art component from Erica Frank or Erica Burton. So my feeling is that we should look at as possibly an NCIP project and proposal, and I'll bring this to the next commission, is that we do replicas on the streets so that they are something, because we're finding less and less every year, ones that are suitable for hanging. That was one of the things that when Jordan and I were working with Tess, is that there are a number of them where the brackets have been fiberglassed on, or they've done poor repairs, or there's cracks on the neck, the back, just because they've been moved back and forth for so many times for so many different years and hung up on the streets. So when we have them on places like the state parks, or they're inside Colton Hall, they're inside the library, they're in a much safer place, when they're inside a building or on the outside. But when they're on the streets, I see that there's a possibility for more damage up there. So whether we can do a replica on aluminum or something like that, they could be mounted in a safer way, I think would be a great solution for us to really highlight the original nature of that art, but just in a replica that's going to be stand up to time. So
Yeah,
Yeah.
could they be photographed and that transferred to some kind of plastic that gets laminated to, as you say, aluminum or?
exactly. And that's what I'm looking at is, doing a full color transfer of something. It made me think about it because as we're talking of the reason I thought about doing it that way is like when we were looking at like Bruce Harris Way and we have the mural out there and doing some kind of reproduction. Is there a way we could do something similar with the angels so that we have them, we're not losing more
Right.
angels, right? And we have to hang them up at least, I believe it's at least 7 feet high. So some of the on Alvarado Street, some of the lower, they have some of the street lights are a little bit lower, so it's harder to get them that low. But I think, I'll do a walkthrough with the Public Works too about where to hang them for next year.
And also on Alvarado, I think you'd want them two-sided, which might be an interesting trick. But on the other hand, you could also, if you're photographically reproducing them, you could shrink them so they're not so big. Therefore, they could be higher. The bottom would be higher that way.
Right. So that's one of the things I'd like to get forward to the, as a possibility NCIP, as I mentioned, for the next meeting, because I think it's all these things are great to discuss and figure out a plan so that I from what I've found from my time here, that there's a lot of love for the angels and a lot of history and people remembering them. And I just get discouraged when we go through all of the collection and we find a lot that are chipped or damaged in any way.
So is there a catalog of all the ones that have been created? A photographic catalog?
We don't have a photographic catalog. We have an Excel spreadsheet of all of the angels, including when they were, some notes on when which ones were renovated, when. But those ones have a descriptor, they have say purple dress with, this kind of playing this instrument on that. So that was one of the things. I was taking photos just with my smartphone as the Herald reporter was in there, just so we had something. And then Jordan and I are going to go back as we get the rest of them coming back so that we have something. But I do think we would want to, if we were to able to move forward with a bigger project in the future, that we would want better photos. So we would want to clean them,
Oh, yeah.
get a better, cleaner photo, because we were in the garage
Yeah.
taking photos, which
No,
not ideal for taking.
not the greatest lighting.
Exactly.
And I believe I found the 2016 photos that we took.
Those are pretty low quality.
Yeah.
Yeah, some of those
Yeah.
they're small, and I don't think we have all of them. So there's some, but they're not like of any kind of archival record that we would have on there. And we have some that we had photos because they were done during the last restorations. When we did the 2007, when we did the 2016 restorations, we have some of the images from those of like ones that we did restorations
Well,
on.
these ones I found are different than what you've seen.
Oh, okay,
I have them on Chalet's old terabyte.
fantastic.
Yeah. But they're probably still not great because they're in the parking garage, but
Any comments on Jordan's report? Okay, it's time for council comments. Or commission comments.
We mentioned having a presentation next time on Stanton Center. Do we want to have any discussion that we need to agendize, or will we postpone that?
Your mic.
Thank you. When we have the presentation at the next meeting on the Stanton Center, do we want to agendize any time for our own discussion, or will we postpone that until March?
That's a good question. I don't have the answer. It would seem to me if we have a presentation next time, that then there's a lot going on between the museum and the Stanton Center, that maybe the March meeting would be a better time to have an action item where we can have a discussion and make motions
Okay,
for where we want to go.
good. Thank you.
And we might want to invite Corey to next month's meeting so that she can hear what are the Stanton Center plans.
Sounds like that would be good. I don't know whether, she could attend
Yeah.
remotely if she wants to.
Sure.
And I just to make a note that anything, if it was an action item, my understanding it would be something that we have the purview to make an action on, correct?
Right. Yeah,
So
we
that,
can-
so basically depending on what MHAA wants to present on or what the presentation would be on. If they needed guidance on like collection or something that was related to our collection, our city collection, or something of that nature. So that's where just to make sure that we put it in the right, whether it's a presentation versus an action item. So I do think, so as Commissioner O'Neill, just to make sure that we would talk with, I'll reach out to Gary and just see where it's on, because I know that there was a request from MHAA from one of our, for example, from one of our items that one of our sculptures, and that could be an action item, but I just want to be clear for them, which is an action item, which is a discussion item. And I'll get that clarity from them before we set
I'm
up. the meeting.
getting the sense that they've got a plan then for Stanton Center. Is that
They're
think-
starting on a plan.
starting
Yeah,
on
I
a
think
plan?
I think
My-
it's evolving.
My reason for my question is 2 or 3 months ago, we talked about trying to participate in the planning instead of letting that go and not having the city involved in any way. So if they're already bypassed us, okay, we were overcome by events, but if they're floundering over there and we want to be involved, then we're going to have to put something on the agenda at the appropriate time. And maybe March is the time. I don't know.
Well, my take on our meeting with them was that they're formulating a plan. And it there might be room for something that the city might be interested in, but they haven't gotten to the point where they're really ready for that input. In other words, they've done a lot of work at this point to start removing the Dolly exhibit. And they've cleaned the carpets, and there's some things they're going to do to the building and so on and so forth. And they have some ideas that I think they weren't ready at that particular time to bounce off the city, but they're thinking about where the city could be involved. And so that's why I think a presentation would be valuable, but I'm not sure that at that point, we want to actually stick our finger in the pie and say, okay, we'll do this, or we recommend that we do this. I think it would be wise to kind of let what the MAA has been talking about and see how that sort of matches with what MHAA is thinking about and doing. And then after that, I think it would be appropriate for us to, amongst ourselves, then talk about what we think ought to happen.
Okay.
And then eventually we're gonna have to go back to these two entities and talk to them about our ideas about how we might work with them. You know, it's not a process that can be done in one meeting, I don't think.
Right. Okay, thank you.
Okay? Tim? No, I'm good.
Nothing.
Mike? Well, I was thinking this afternoon that, you know, there are a lot of entities, we're talking about MHAA and MAA, and there's YAC, and there are all of these different art communities here in Monterey. And some are more interested in history and some are more interested in art. And it just seems, and everybody needs money. And the city doesn't seem to be interested in my view, in the Museums and Cultural Arts Commission or the history, I don't know, the museums division, if you will. You know, I think if we're gonna if we're gonna coordinate with these other entities, we've got to have staff. Because the commission doesn't, you know, we can act as emissaries, but we really can't do anything as individuals, I don't think. And so you have to have staff who can coordinate these public-private enterprises that everybody's talking about. And so I think the commission and Brian, unfortunately, have to be focused on the city's budget and the activity there that's coming up, so that we get the ore in the water and potentially get some more staff. Because without staff, we're not going to do a music program, we're not going to do an art program, because there's nobody to prepare the materials that we can use then in a big public meeting. And so that's my 2 cents for the week.
Well, there's also John for comments.
Yes, John, sorry.
No,
The being
no comments. No, I'm good.
Okay.
Okay, and with that, we're adjourned. And the next meeting is the 5th of February.